If India grows 5 percentage points faster than China until 2030, China is still going to contribute $176 trillion more of GDP than India's. It's just that sheer size. But there's almost still 1 billion people who's living under $300 per month. They're not really yet middle income. When economies like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, when they stagnated, their growth level kind of leveled off, their productivity level was already at 80% of the US's. China today is 20%.
However optimistic about China's economic future?
Let me put it this way. I'm concerned about China's current economic situation. But to put things into perspective, there have been 12 economic recessions in the US in the last 6 or 7 decades or so. This is China's first official economic recession, deep economic recession, but economic recession nevertheless. By the way, it took US 10 years to recover from the Great Recession. So we got to ask the question, is this cyclical? The kind of boom and bust cycles that all these market economies experience? Or is it a permanent decline? Now, the peak China theory seems to suggest it's a permanent decline because of the relationship between the state and entrepreneurs, the demographics. But really, it's, China was the last to exit from the pandemic. There's been a significant real estate downturn. Chinese households never got stimulus support, right? Never got a package to help them. U.S. spent $5 trillion on a COVID, economic recession that officially lasted for 2 months. They had a massive package. Also, China's size, given its current stage of development, inevitably it's going to grow slower. And by the way, even if India grows 5 percentage points faster than China until 2030, China is still going to contribute $176 trillion more of GDP than India's. It's just that sheer size. But what I wanted to really emphasize is that in terms of where China is today and China's potential, that's where I am a little bit more optimistic. Just this massive gap to fill. In what sense? There's almost still 1 billion people who's living under $300 per month. They're not really yet middle income. There's 176 million migrant workers who, if they had the proper social protection, social security protection, all that, they would unleash at least 1 trillion RMB of additional consumption. Service sector, 80% share of GDP here in the US, it's only 50% in China. When economies like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, when they stagnated, their growth level kind of leveled off, their productivity level was already at 80% of the US's. China today is 20%. So there's still a massive gap, and there's convergence that we see historically and across the countries. And that's why I'm saying don't write China off. It's still the second largest economy. It's still going to grow at a reasonable rate. It's not going to be spectacular like the last few decades, but there's a huge room of convergence to be looking for here.
Can we talk about demographics? As you know, some people say demographics is destiny. We've got the one-child policy and its impact, and then you've got a divide mirrored around the world in various different ways between young versus old as well. Can you just talk about the different forces playing on the Chinese economy?
Well, first of all, I have a little bit of a contrarian view when it comes to aging and demographics, and I just don't think this is the first-order challenge for China. I think the first-order challenge for China is if they give up the pro-growth agenda, as I mentioned. But I don't think demographics is. And here, let me tell you why. First of all, just looking across countries, there's been some recent, very robust and serious academic studies that have shown that demographic aging causing a slowdown in growth and reduction in per capita income was true before 1990. That relationship completely reversed after 1990. Why? The arrival of technology and automation. And so aging countries tend to adopt these technologies more rapidly and also spread them across different sectors. So actually, aging countries became the richer countries after the post-1990 sample. Now, China accounts for about 50% of industrial robot exports. Were China really concerned about the reduction in labor force, very, very quickly. They can, replace a labor force with robotics. And by the way, there's still a massive number of undereducated rural population whose wages are way below the market rates that they can tap into. So in the end, it's really about productivity. It's about labor productivity, it's about productivity, it's about how to engage with things like new technologies like AI, which is going to displace labor anyways. It's not so much the number of people in the population. So if demographics didn't explain China on the way up, I doubt that it was explain China on the way down.
You've also written about your generation, generation born in, the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, being a distinct break from the past. Another generation will come along. Do you sense another break coming, or do you think there is more continuity because the system has shifted already?
China currently has, probably my generation and post-90s compared to my parents' generation, probably represents the biggest generational gap in China. But I really think that the new generation will change the economic and potentially political landscape for China. So my parents' generation, through all the hardship, they're risk averse. They are massive savers. All the international controversies that we've had with China exporting too much or saving too much, well, that's about to change with the new generation. 85% of domestic consumer credit is accounted by 35 and under.
Right.
University students have no hesitation, despite having no income. One click on Taobao, which is Alibaba's e-commerce website, borrow the money to buy a lipstick. I don't know how they repay. Maybe their parents are paying it back, but they are a borrowing, spending generation. Huge amount of spending, a focus on apparel, entertainment, leisure, traveling. Unlike their saving, parents. And by the way, why is it? It's a puzzle that I write in my book about how is it that an average young 20-something, early 30-something person can afford apartments at San Francisco prices when the average income in that city is about a tenth of San Francisco income. Well, there's 6 wallets behind the 20-something person, that person's spouse and their parents, and maybe the grandparents would all chip in. So we got to take into account the fact that culture also plays a role and maybe changes Chinese families. But most importantly, I like to talk about the new generation of the Chinese because it's not just the consumption habits, the economic landscape. They're extremely open-minded. Many of them have studied abroad. Something like, 500,000 students go abroad to study every year. They come back and they try to change the economic landscape and try to be entrepreneurial. All the international surveys show that they care about things like animal rights, diversity, likes to have diversity, very open religiously, and so to many, many other things, very much unlike the previous generations. So I think in terms of talking about the East and West and US and China, all that, they will be a better bridge between China and the rest of the world. And I think there's much more of a convergence between the millennials or the Gen Zs between China and the rest of the world than the previous generation.
What do you guys think? Do you agree with her assessment of China's economy moving forward? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.